The title of my talk today is Buryats and the Russian invasion of Ukraine, misplaced loyalty and double betrayal. And first of all, this is the outline of my talk. And first I will just tell you a little bit about myself. And then about Buryats, about the indigenous Siberian nation I come from, then about Buryatia, and the new term I have invented, Buryatians, right? And why I had to create such a term, and how Buryats and Buryatians were involved in 2022 and 23 Russian invasion of Ukraine and in the Russo-Ukrainian war in general, which started in 2014, actually. And the topic of my research currently is ethnic disproportions in the Russian side casualties of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And then we're going to talk about misplaced loyalty and double betrayal, how the Buryats became the main cannon fodder and the main scapegoats of the 2022-23 Russian invasion of Ukraine. And then we'll talk about indigenous Siberian anti-war movement and decolonial activism. So first of all, I'll tell you a little bit about myself, right? So I am an ethnic Buryat, and I am an anti-war and decolonial activist. And also, I am a PhD computational scientist with the University of Notre Dame Center for Research Computing. And I'm a chemist by training, and before the February 24th, 2022, the main focus of my research was actually quantum computing. And this is how I became a visiting scientist with the IBM research in the Silicon Valley, actually. We do quantum computer simulations of chemistry together, actually. And but in the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the full-scale invasion in February 2022, we created an anti-Buryat anti-war organization. We were the first ethnic organization, actually, of that kind, founded by Russian citizens. And I was the co-founder of the Free Buryatia Foundation, which is by now a well-known anti-war advocacy organization. And I have worked with this organization as a chief analyst from April 2022 to April 2023. And actually, during my work for the Free Buryatia Foundation, I wrote a research paper on the ethnic composition, on the ethnic statistics of the Russian side casualties of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and has recently been published in the Inner Asia Journal. And to the best of my knowledge, this is the first academic paper which was published in a research journal on this topic. There is also an archive preprint by Dr. Alexander Bessudnov, but it hasn't been published in a journal yet. And in this work, we used slightly different approaches. We didn't just analyze the ethnic names. We also talked to the actual people, actual activists who actually collected the information about casualties, Russian side casualties from ethnic regions of Russia. And we actually collected information from several activist groups from Kalmykia, from Tuva, from Sakha, and Sakha, Yakutia, Buryatia, Chechnya, and also from ethnic Kazakh activists. So, and this paper was published in May, and we will discuss it later in my talk. So now the focus of my research has shifted towards social sciences, and right now I'm working on the statistics of the Russian side casualties and the information we can get from the obituaries, right, from social media, mining, and things like that. So let's talk about Buryats, Buryatia, and Buryatians. So actually, the Buryats or Buryat Mongols are a Mongolic nation, which is indigenous to the southeastern Siberia or North Asia, right? So because Siberia itself is a colonial term, right? And the alternative term for this area is North Asia. And in the picture on the right-hand side, you can see our traditional outfits, right? And it is a traditional summer festival in Buryatia. And this is what we look like, and this is what the weather is like in Buryatia in midsummer. So it's not that cold during this summer, right? But the rest of the year is very cold. So there are about 460,000 Buryats living in Russia, mostly in Buryatia, in Irkutsk region, and in Transbaikalia, and 45,000 in Mongolia and 10,000 in China. And today, Buryatia is a part of the Far Eastern Federal District of Russia. So at first, Russian settlers arrived to Buryatia in the second half of the 17th century, and Buryatia was colonized during the 17th and 18th century. And of course, it was military conquest, but you know, officially, both the Soviet Union and post-Soviet Russia, they only promoted the narrative of peaceful and voluntarily unification with the Russian Empire, which is obviously not true. But unfortunately, our true history and the true history of colonization of Buryatia was just erased from our memory, and very few people are actually talking about that, because now it is dangerous, actually, and basically you can go to jail for that, for publicizing this type of information, how Buryatia was colonized and conquered, and how much our nation was hurt by that, right? And how many people died. So it's just not safe to talk about this. And there are less than 1 million people, 970,000 living in Buryatia, and most of them are ethnic Russians, actually, because Buryats make up about 30% of Buryatia's population, and about 1/3 of ethnic Buryats live outside Buryatia. And that's the result of Joseph Stalin's partition of Buryat Mongolia, right? Because historically, Buryat Mongolia was a much greater territory. And in the picture on the right-hand side below, you can see what the map of the Buryat Mongol Autonomous Republic in the 1920s, actually, and it was much greater area. There was some area to the north from Lake Baikal, for instance, and there were two, so to say, exclaves, right, which are now in Irkutsk region. And so if you can see the cursor here, so this area, the area to the northwest is now Irkutsk region, and this area, the exclave to the south, is now part of Transbaikalia. And during the Soviet time, they were called the Aga and Ustarda Buryat autonomous districts. There are two autonomous districts, but they were merged in the year 2008. Actually, they were merged into Transbaikalia and Irkutsk Oblast, respectively. Actually, the autonomy, the ethnic autonomy was taken away from the Buryat population, actually, and they were just ceased to exist. So, and what we have left now is just the Republic of Buryatia, right? And because the population of Buryatia is very ethnically diverse, and Buryats are only a minority there, For the lack of an official collective term for the residents of Buryatia, I'll use the word Buryatians, right? So Buryatians, who are mostly Russians, and only less than 1/3 of them actually are Buryats, right? And it's very important to know that the demographics is very complex, right? Because the majority of Buryatia's population are Russians, and at the same time, many Buryats live outside the present-day Buryatia, right? Some of them in Transbaikalia region, in the former Aga Buryat Autonomous District, and some of them in Irkutsk region, right? And my family was actually from the Usterda, so from the Irkutsk region, not from Buryatia proper, actually, right? And it is a result of Joseph Stalin's partition of Buryatia into 5 parts, and Buryat Mongolia. And a prominent anthropologist, Marjorie Mandelstam-Balzer from Georgetown University, described this event as Stalin's gerrymandering of Buryatia. She described it as gerrymandering because the goal was to dilute the Buryats both demographically and politically, and to weaken them as a nation, as an identity, and to reduce the political risks there, right? Actually, yes, this goal has been achieved, as we will see later in my talk. But nevertheless, let's see what happened when Russia launched the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022-23. It's very well known that there are huge ethnic disproportions. In the Russian side, casualties of the 2022-23 invasion of Ukraine, and there were disproportionately high numbers of the residents of Buryatia, of Buryatians, and of ethnic Buryats among the Russian troops in Ukraine, and among the Russian occupation forces, and also among the casualties, right? And the reason for that is very simple. Buryatia is among the regions with the highest concentration of military units per capita with respect to its population, right? Because it's very sparsely populated. And there are a lot of military units just because it's a region which is close to the border with Mongolia, and basically it's how to say, it's understood as not just as a border with Mongolia, but also with China through Mongolia, right? Like by proxy, so to say. And because of that, it's a very important military district, and there are a lot of military units there. And at the same time, the region is struggling economically. It's not the poorest region of Russia, but the median income is lower than in most Russian regions, right? And because of this, Buryatians, regardless of ethnicity, are more likely to join the military as contract soldiers just because they can't find any other job, right? Any other stable job in the region. But contrary to the popular opinion, it's the combination of both factors, presence of military units and presence of military bases, and poverty. And actually, presence of military units is more important than poverty, because in the regions which are prosperous economically, if there are a lot of military units, there will be a lot of casualties as well. And also systemic discrimination of Buryats clearly affects their social mobility, and therefore probably they are more likely to join the military compared to the non-Buryat residents of Buryatia, of non-Buryat ethnicity, such as Russians and so on. Military units from Buryatia were involved in the Russo-Ukrainian War since 2014. This is very important to note. And more specifically, the 5th Tank Brigade from Ulan-Ude stood out because there are a lot of ethnic Buryats, about 40%. 40% of the military personnel there are Buryats, but they're still a minority, right? However, they just stood out because of their Asian appearance, and of course, the Ukrainians and the whole world immediately knew that Putin sent, troops from Siberia to participate in this war, in the Donbass war, just because they were Asians, and obviously there are no Asians in the in the East Ukraine regions, right? And but from the first days of 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine, it became obvious that a lot of Buryatians were in the invading Russian forces, right? But ethnic Buryats again stood out due to their race, and it was immediately clear that there are a lot of Asian-looking troops, right? Just because the 5th Tank Brigade again was involved, heavily involved in the assault of Kyiv region, right? And the 5th Tank Brigade is a Russian military unit with the highest possible percentage of Buryats. It's 40%. It's just incredible, right? Because even in Buryatia, they're like only 29 or 30% of Buryats, but it's even higher percentage in the 5th Tank Brigade just because of military specialization, because Buryats are typically drafted to tank units. Because of their short stature, because they are shorter, right, and they fit in the tanks. And it's obvious because, for instance, there is an air assault brigade also located in Ulan-Ude, but there are mostly Russians, right? There are much fewer Buryats there, so the proportion is like this, right? Just because typically, an average Russian soldier, ethnic Russian soldier, is taller than an average Buryat soldier, and they are drafted to air assault or paratroopers units because of that. So, this is what happened in 2022. So it was obvious there are a lot of Buryats, ethnic Buryats, and also other Buryatians among the casualties, and also among the invading Russian force. So, and here you can see the diagram showing the ethnic disproportion in Russian side casualties. And these diagrams are from my paper, actually. And it's based on the data as of September 2022, right before the partial mobilization order by Vladimir Putin. So, and you can see here that, first of all, any ethnic minority, any ethnic minorities in general are more likely to die in this war than ethnic Russians. About 1.7 times more likely on average, but for Asian minorities such as Kazakhs, Buryats, and Tuvans, the probability is for 5 to 10 times greater, according to different sources, than for ethnic Russians, right? And if you look at the diagram, at the pie chart, on the left-hand side, you can see the percentage of ethnic Kazakhs, Buryats, and Tuvans among the casualties. And on the right-hand side, the percentage of Kazakhs, Buryats, and Tuvans, respectively, in the Russia's population. And this is a dramatic difference, right? And also, if you are an ethnic Russian, actually there are more than 80% of Russians in Russia, but there are about 70% of ethnic Russians among the casualties, right? So the proportion is clearly shifted towards ethnic minorities, and more specifically towards Asian ethnic minorities. But between March 2022, the start of Russian invasion and assault of Kyiv region, which happened in March 2022, and May 2023, the percentage of ethnic Buryats among the confirmed Russian casualties has decreased, right? Almost twice. So more than twice, actually, from 3.3 to 1.6%. It decreased very dramatically, even despite the disproportional draft of Buryatians under Putin's partial mobilization order, right? Even though they were drafted more often, their fraction in the casualties still decreased very dramatically, and the percentage of Buryatians is down from 5.5 to 2.8. Actually, it's decreasing, and this is a very interesting tendency, because actually, though Buryatia was hit disproportionately hard by the partial mobilization, and according to the Mediazona media outlet and conflict intelligence team and Free Buryatia foundations, Buryatians were drafted 2.5 to 3 times more often compared to an average Russian man, right? However, the death rate among the drafted or mobilized Buryatians is even higher than that. So they die 7 times more often than the civilians drafted from other regions. And that is that Buryatians, including the ethnic Buryats, aren't just drafted more often, they are more likely to die even after being drafted, right? Compared to other drafted Russian civilians. That means that probably they are used in the most dangerous places, right? And they're given the most, assigned the most dangerous missions. And I have an evidence for that, because they were actually the first the first officially confirmed casualties among drafted Russian civilians were from Buryatia, actually. They were ethnic Russians, but they were from Buryatia, and that happened on the October 4th. 2022. So it was October 4th. So it was 12 days, literally 12 days after the partial mobilization was announced. And there were already first casualties, and they were from Buryatia. So they're sent to the front lines right away without any training, anything like that. And but despite the disproportional mobilization, disproportional drafting of Buryatians, the percentage of Buryats and Buryatians in general among the Russian side casualties is still decreasing. And that shows that, contrary to popular stereotype, the Buryats and Buryatians, they're not enthusiastic about this war at all. They aren't so willing to participate, to fight against Ukraine. And basically, I strongly believe that that's the reason why Buryatia government used such barbaric methods, while drafting the Buryatian civilians, because people were literally taken out of their beds at 4 o'clock in the morning, and just they were put in the buses and sent away. And they didn't even, the authorities didn't even provide proper documents, right, to drafting those people. And they broke all the rules possible. It was, and according to a human rights activist from Buryatia, Nadezhda Nizovkina, according to her, it was not even drafting of civilians, not mobilization. It looked like forced deportation, right? So, and just imagine the police knocking at your door at 4 o'clock in the morning, pulling you out of your bed, and just putting you in a bus and sending you away. And 12 days later, you die in the war in Ukraine. Actually, this is what happened to those people, and they didn't know even what to do, how to resist, because that was intentionally done before the weekend, and people couldn't even, file a complaint or anything like that. So, and Buryatia stood out because of that, because Buryatia was the only region in Russia where this was done like on a regular basis. There were a lot of cases like that in Buryatia. Apparently, people were not so willing to participate in this war, and the authorities were aware of that. So, and now let's talk about misplaced loyalty and double betrayal, right? It's a very important topic, because Buryats, unfortunately, they play a very infamous role in this war. And first they were the cannon fodder, and then they were the scapegoats of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So first of all, during the Soviet era, the Buryats were one of the most successful ethnic minorities in the Soviet Union, and many Western anthropologists studying the indigenous people of Siberia, they noted that Buryats were actually very, very successful. And for instance, they have the highest percentage, one of the highest, second only to Kalmyks, as far as I can remember, highest percentage of higher education in the Soviet Russia, right? They have a greater percentage of people with higher education compared to the Russians themselves. And Buryats became a model minority, and they just tried to be nice and blend into the Soviet society. But these achievements came at the cost of the erosion of the indigenous identity and culture, and the gradual loss of Buryat language, because we don't speak our native language, actually, and we are the most assimilated and Russified minority in Siberia, actually. And At the same time, loyalty towards Russia and the Kremlin became one of the main components of Buryat identity. It's not just a good relationship with our Russian neighbors, right? But it's a relationship of loyalty. So it's often misunderstood, and when some Russian influencers started talking about bloodthirsty Buryats who want to kill Russians, right? It was such a deep insult because it's not about just it's not about false accusations. It's about betrayed loyalty. It's a much deeper feeling, right? So because those who don't value such loyalty, they don't deserve it, right? And so we gradually lost our language and our identity and culture, and also our history, our true history was erased. And the deeply ingrained misplaced loyalty towards the Kremlin, along with the loss of indigenous identity, is the main reason why so many Buryats still support the Russian aggression of Ukraine, or at least they don't protest against it. And this boundless loyalty, unfortunately, only resulted in double betrayal. First, the Buryats and Buryatians in general were used as a cannon fodder of this unjust war, and then the Buryats were scapegoated for the war crimes of the Russian army in Ukraine. And the most famous case was that the Bucha massacre was blamed on the ethnic Buryats. And as we all know, in early April 2022, after Russian occupation forces left the Ukrainian city of Bucha, the evidence of horrific massacre of Ukrainian civilians by the Russian troops was uncovered, but it was immediately blamed on the ethnic Buryats by both Ukrainian sources and a number of prominent Russian anti-war influencers. And that was especially painful to us. And no one, with the exception of the conflict intelligence team, who are very professional and very knowledgeable, no one noticed that the story just did not add up, because there are no mono-ethnic Buryat military units. It's a part of the Soviet military policies, which were inherited by Putin's Russia. So even within a tank crew, there would be 2 Russians and 1 Buryat. So they try to avoid any mono-ethnic teams as much as possible. And by the way, all the commanders, all the officers from captain and above, they are all either Russians or non-Buryat ethnicities. There are no Buryats, almost no Buryats there. So, and the cleansing, or zachystka in Russian, operation in Bucha was done by Air Assault Regiment from Pskov region, and not by the tank brigade from Buryatia. And neither by the 64 Motor Rifle Brigade from Khabarovsk, which was initially blamed for that. And that was confirmed by the POW interviews published by Ukrainian sources and the obituaries of the Russian soldiers killed in Bucha. They are almost exclusively paratroopers from Pskov. And actually, the people in the infamous Buryats in Bucha picture on the left-hand side, right? On the right-hand side, they are not Buryats. They are Sakha Yakut soldiers. And this picture was not taken in Bucha. It was taken in Khabarovsk Krai of Russia in 2020, 2 years before that. And most of those guys in this picture, they actually left the army because they were like 18-year-old conscripts. And they just they served for 1 year and just went home. So probably hardly any one of them was involved in the Russian invasion of Ukraine, actually. So, and so this picture was just, well, totally wrong. It's not Buryats, they're not in Bucha, and it's not in 2022. Yeah, the damage was done because very many people believed. And it's understandable with Ukrainians because they don't know the details of Russian demographics, right? But I have a lot of questions for the Russian anti-war influencers who spread this narrative and, because of their hate speech towards Buryats and stuff like that. Because actually, I strongly believe that the motivation behind the Russian anti-war influences blaming Buryats for war crimes and non-Russians in general is shifting responsibility from Russians to the indigenous ethnic minorities. And I strongly believe it's also a part of colonial mindset, right? But eventually the investigation by New York Times showed that it was indeed the Air Assault Regiment from Pskov responsible for the Bucha massacre. And there was only one person with a Buryat name, a 19-year-old soldier who served in that regiment, and he made a phone call using a phone stolen from an executed Ukrainian civilian. But based on the data I have collected, this is a very rare occurrence for a Buryat person to be drafted to this regiment. And this person apparently was the only Buryat involved in the Bucha massacre, but none of the Russian anti-war influencers ever apologized for blaming the whole Buryat nation based on a single person who participated in a war crime. Though there were way more Russians involved in this war crime, but they preferred to blame everything on Buryats just based on one person. And there is so far no evidence of disproportionately high involvement of ethnic Buryats in war crimes in Ukraine. They are definitely involved, but they are involved, on the same rate as they are present there, right? So there is no evidence of Buryats, or by the way, the Chechens committing the war crimes more often. The problem is any Asian-looking person among the Russian occupation force is believed to be a Buryat today, and any a person from North Caucasus is believed to be a Chechen, and there are a lot of mistakes made because of that. And for instance, a Chechen activist, Abu Bakr Yangulbayev, told me about a case in Ukrainian city of Izum, where a doctor was killed by a Russian soldier, which was from North Caucasus and believed to be a Chechen, but finally, it turned out he was from a different region. He was not a Chechen. He was from Dagestan, and he actually served in Moscow. He was from Moscow, so he had nothing to do in Chechnya. And there's a similar situation with Buryats, actually, because there are a lot of Kazakhs serving in that paratroopers unit from Pskov, and probably they were also mistaken for Buryats. But unfortunately, such prominent and influential figures as Pope Francis still believe that Russians aren't to blame because all atrocities were committed by Buryats and Chechens. And notably in that infamous interview, the editors didn't even know how to spell the word Buryat in English, so they used Italian spelling instead, Buryati instead of Buryat. And as I worked for a Catholic organization, of course I was outraged by Pope Francis' words, and I'm just trying to attract the as much attention as possible to this issue. And by the way, I joined the Satanic Temple to do that, just to attract some attention to this issue. Just say, Pope Francis made me a Satanist, right? Because Pope Francis falsely accused my nation, and the Satanic Temple members were the only religious organization who showed empathy and support towards me. And that's why I decided that actually, Satanists today are more moral than the Pope himself, actually. And this is why I just use it to start a discussion at my Catholic university and Catholic community in general. So probably I'm sacrificing my career doing that. But, well, if I lose my career, so be it. I want to defend my nation anyway. So, and let's talk about the anti-war movement and the decolonial activism. This is the most important part of my talk, right? And first of all, for us, indigenous Siberian nations, anti-war and decolonial activism are very closely related, because both those movements fight against the imperial policies of the Russian government and the imperial mindset in the present-day Russian society. It was very obvious from the very first days that Russia treats Ukraine as its own rebellious province and not an independent country. It's a very important notion because unfortunately Russia still, the Kremlin, both the Kremlin and a significant part of Russian society, they still believe that the countries which were once a part of Soviet Union, they're just rebellious provinces, right? And we need to subdue them. This is what they say, basically. And this also applies to the former parts of the Russian Empire, such as Finland, and also the former parts of the Eastern Bloc, actually, right? And basically, a significant part of Russian society and the Kremlin still think about them as their own rebellious provinces. They just don't have enough military power to conquer them back, but they think it's their moral right to do so. It's very important to understand. And Russian propaganda portrays the Ukrainians as a second-class nation with bogus culture and language, and it is exactly the same colonial mindset which is behind this discrimination and oppression of us indigenous people. And the Kremlin wants to erase the Ukrainian history and culture exactly the same way our true history and our indigenous culture was erased. There are also a lot of similarities there. And basically, we need to understand that unless this mindset in both Russian leadership and Russian society changes, Russia will will continue to be a threat to the world, not just to the Europe, not just to Ukraine, not just the former parts of the Soviet Union, but to the whole world, just because it's a nuclear superpower. And of course, when a nuclear superpower with a million-strong army attacks a neighboring country, it's very strange to blame it all on a tiny indigenous Siberian nation, right, which was itself colonized by the same superpower. And in the wake of 2022, Russian invasion of Ukraine, we, indigenous activists, we just could not help but notice those parallels. And that led to the surge of simultaneously the anti-war and decolonial movement, which are closely related among the indigenous people of Russia. And I was a co-founder of the Free Buryatia Foundation. That was the first ethnic anti-war organization, and I'm proud to have paved the way to other activists and other ethnic organizations, right? And the main focus of my work is the regional and ethnic statistics of the Russian side casualties. And I still believe that spreading disinformation is the most efficient way to get through to the audience, which is still supporting the aggression against Ukraine. Because unfortunately, I find out that appealing to the moral considerations that aggressive war is a crime, actually, even according to the Russian, even under the Russian criminal law, it's a crime. But unfortunately, it's not as efficient, because those people who understand that this aggression is a crime and it is immoral, they are against this war anyway, right? And we want to affect the audience, which is either undecided or still supporting the war. And the most sensitive issue to them is the number of casualties, especially among the civilians who were drafted after September 2022, after the partial mobilization order. This is the most sensitive issue, and that's why the Russian government tries at all costs just to hide it, to conceal it. And there are even court rulings against publishing the lists of casualties. And it's now illegal in Russia. And now it was just officially recommended to the local authorities not to publish even, even single obituaries, not just lists of casualties, but single obituaries, right? Because this is the most dangerous, the most sensitive issue where people can, general public can change their opinion, right, from supporting the war to protesting against the war. So yes, but I mean, I have to admit, it's not just a disaster of not just the number of casualties is a disaster, it's also a moral disaster, right? Because it's an unjust war. So it's not just people from Buryatia dying, right? They are also killing Ukrainians. They are becoming the war criminals, essentially. And it is not just a pain, it's also a disgrace. It's a horrible situation which will have very deep and painful moral consequences when all those people come back and they discover that they were actually criminals and not heroes, they are criminals. And that has already happened actually with the war in Afghanistan, right? Soviet Union invasion of Afghanistan and then Chechnya. And I strongly believe that our work has also contributed to the dramatic decrease of the percentage of Buryats and Buryatians among the Russian side casualties. It is indicative of decrease of Buryat and Buryatian participation and support in this war. I know that there are many factors involved, but I strongly believe that our work has also contributed to this. But of course, we have a lot of work ahead of us. And the motivation behind my work is just, when something like this is happening in front of your eyes, you just cannot just watch it and not do anything, right? It's just psychologically much easier just to do whatever you can. Because when the Russian invasion of Ukraine started, I realized that now I understand why the famous religious philosopher Simone Weil killed herself by starvation, starved herself to death in 1943, just out of compassion towards the Nazi concentration camp prisoners. Because when it's happening so close to you, you just you cannot live with your normal life, right? And you just feel guilty. And it's exactly the same thing with us, because we know that Ukrainian children are dying under Russian bombs right now. And there are people from our region, people of our ethnicity, and probably our distant relatives participating in this war. And they are committing this crime right now. And we need to do something to stop it, whatever we can. And with that, I'll just thank you for your attention.